The year is 1906. Deep beneath the arid mountains of Nevada, where the desert sun never reaches, something ancient is waiting. This isn't a story you'll find in history books. It's been buried, literally, by time, fear, and those who survived it. But the truth has a way of clawing its way back to the surface. What happened in those coal mines over a century ago defies explanation. Experienced miners, men who'd spent their entire lives underground, fled in terror, abandoning lucrative work and swearing never to return. Some disappeared entirely. Others emerged with stories so disturbing that their own families questioned their sanity. They spoke of creatures, not animals, not men, something in between, something that walked upright, moved with terrifying intelligence, and watched from the darkness with eyes that glowed like dying embers. This is the story of the Nevada coal miners who encountered what they could only describe as lizard people. In the early 1900s, Nevada was booming. The discovery of silver and gold had transformed desolate landscapes into bustling mining towns almost overnight. But while precious metals grabbed headlines, coal mining was the backbone that kept the operation running. Steam engines, smelters, and heating systems all demanded constant fuel. The Humboldt Range, a rugged mountain chain in northern Nevada, held rich coal deposits that attracted experienced miners from across the country. These weren't greenhorns chasing dreams of striking it rich. These were professionals, Welsh immigrants who'd worked the pits of their homeland, grizzled Americans who'd survived cave-ins and gas explosions, men who knew the underground better than their own homes. In late 1905, a new operation began near the small settlement of Golconda. The Humboldt Coal Company had purchased mineral rights to a promising area where initial surveys suggested extensive seams running deep into the mountain. By January 1906, 3 main shafts had been sunk, and crews were working around the clock in shifts. James "Big Jim" Thornton led the operation. At 47, he'd been mining since he was 12 years old. His hands were permanently blackened by coal, dust that no amount of scrubbing could remove. He'd survived 2 cave-ins, lost 3 fingers to a rock fall, and could tell you the composition of a coal seam just by listening to the sound his pickaxe made against it. Under his supervision worked 23 men divided into 3 crews. There was William Mackay, a Scotsman whose father and grandfather had both died in mining accidents. Miguel Cortez, who'd come north from the Mexican silver mines seeking better pay. The Chen brothers, recent immigrants who spoke little English but whose skill with explosives was unmatched. And young Thomas Fletcher, just 19, on his first real mining job, eager to prove himself. These men knew the risks. Cave-ins, gas pockets, underground floods, equipment failures. They accepted these dangers as part of the profession. What they couldn't have anticipated was something far more disturbing lurking in the depths they were about to breach. The trouble started subtly in early March 1906. Miners working the deepest shaft, designated Shaft C, began reporting strange occurrences. At first, it was easy to dismiss. Underground work played tricks on the mind. The darkness, the isolation, the constant pressure of knowing you were hundreds of feet below the surface with tons of rock overhead. It could make anyone jumpy. William Mackay was the first to mention the footsteps. He'd been working alone in a side tunnel, chipping away at a promising coal face, when he heard distinct footsteps behind him. Not the shuffle of boots on gravel that miners made, but something else, something deliberate. The pattern was wrong, too rhythmic, almost ceremonial. He turned, holding his oil lamp high. The tunnel stretched empty behind him, shadows dancing in the flickering light. Mackay called out, thinking perhaps one of his crew had followed him. No response, just the echo of his own voice and the distant drip of water somewhere in the darkness. He returned to work, convinced he'd imagined it, but 15 minutes later, he heard it again, closer this time. Definitely footsteps, definitely approaching. This time when he spun around, his lamp revealed something that made his heart skip. Claw marks, fresh ones, gouged deep into the timber support beam not 15 feet from where he stood. 4 parallel grooves, each nearly half an inch deep, running from ceiling height down to about waist level, as if something with considerable strength had dragged massive claws down the wood. Mackay examined the marks closely. They were fresh, with splinters still pale where they'd been torn away. But that was impossible. He'd passed that exact spot just minutes ago when entering the section, and the beam had been unmarked. He reported it to Big Jim Thornton when the shift ended. Thornton examined the marks himself the next day, frowning deeply. Could be equipment, he suggested, though without much conviction. Maybe someone's pick dragged against it. But picks didn't leave marks like that. Both men knew it. These gouges were organic, made by something living, something with claws. Over the next week, more miners reported similar experiences. The Chun brothers heard what sounded like breathing, slow, deep, and rhythmic, coming from an unexplored side tunnel. When they investigated with lanterns, they found nothing but disturbed dirt, as if something had been resting there and left in a hurry. Miguel Cortez swore something brushed past him in the dark when his lamp briefly went out. He felt scales, dry, cool scales against his arm. When he got the lamp relit seconds later, he was alone, but his sleeve was torn and faint scratches marked his forearm. Thomas Fletcher, working near the end of Shaft C, found strange tracks pressed into the muddy floor. They looked almost human, elongated footprints with what could have been 5 toes. But there was something wrong about them. The proportions were off. The toe arrangement was unusual, and there were marks beside each print, as if something had dragged a tail. Fletcher called over William McKay to examine the tracks. Both men crouched in the cramped tunnel, their lamps casting wavering shadows across the strange impressions. McKay had seen many things in his years underground. Rat tracks, strange mineral formations, even the fossilized remains of ancient creatures pressed into coal seams. But nothing like this. Could be a bear, Fletcher suggested, though his voice betrayed his doubt. Maybe it wandered into one of the shafts? McKay shook his head slowly. Bears don't leave tracks like this, lad. And they sure as hell don't make it this deep without being noticed. He traced the outline with his finger, careful not to disturb the impression. Look at the stride. Whatever made these was walking upright, on 2 legs. The 2 men followed the tracks deeper into the tunnel. The footprints led them away from the main shaft, into a narrow side passage that had been only partially explored. The air grew noticeably cooler as they progressed, and both men detected a strange odor, musky, reptilian, utterly foreign to the usual smells of coal and rock. After about 50 yards, the tracks simply stopped. Not at a dead end, not at a collapse. They just ended in the middle of the passage, as if whatever made them had simply vanished into the air, or into the wall. McKay ran his hands over the rock face where the tracks ended. Solid stone. No crevices. No holes large enough for anything bigger than a rat. Yet the evidence was undeniable. Something had walked this passage and then disappeared. When Thornton received these reports, he faced a dilemma. He couldn't ignore the consistent testimonies of his experienced men. These weren't hysterical newcomers or superstitious immigrants. These were professionals, men who'd worked underground for decades without complaint. But he also couldn't afford to shut down operations based on unexplained sounds and strange tracks. The Humboldt Coal Company had investors, contracts, payrolls to meet. Stopping work would require solid evidence, not just unsettling stories. Thornton called a meeting with his 3 shift foremen. We continue operations, he announced. But no man works alone anymore. Everyone pairs up. And I want lanterns positioned every 20 feet in the active tunnels. Whatever's spoken to men will find it or prove there's nothing there. The new policy helped morale somewhat. Miners felt safer working in pairs, and the additional lighting pushed back the oppressive darkness that seemed to breed fear. For 2 days, nothing unusual occurred. The work progressed smoothly. Coal flowed steadily from the mountain's depths. Then Thomas Fletcher disappeared. It happened during the night shift on March 18th. Fletcher and his partner, a veteran miner named Robert Hayes, were assigned to extend a promising seam in the lower levels of Shaft C. They'd been working for approximately 3 hours when Hayes's lamp began to sputter and fail. Keep working, Hayes told Fletcher. I'll head back to the supply station and get a fresh lamp. Won't be more than 10 minutes. Standard procedure. The supply station was located at the main junction, a short walk back through well-lit passages. Hayes made the trip, refilled his lamp, and headed back. By his estimate, He was gone no more than 12 minutes. When he returned to their work site, Thomas Fletcher was gone. Hayes called out. No response. He searched the immediate area, thinking perhaps Fletcher had stepped into one of the side passages to relieve himself. Nothing. He expanded his search, growing more concerned. Fletcher's equipment lay exactly where he'd been working, his pick resting against the cold face, his lamp still burning steadily. But Fletcher himself had vanished. Hayes ran back to the main shaft, shouting for help. Within 15 minutes, a dozen miners had gathered. Big Jim Thornton organized them into search teams, each group taking a different tunnel branching from the area where Fletcher had last been seen. They searched for 3 hours. Every passage, every chamber, every crevice large enough for a man to hide in or fall into. They called Fletcher's name until their voices were hoarse. They listened in complete silence for any sound response. Nothing. It was as if the mountain had simply swallowed him whole. At dawn, exhausted and frustrated, the search teams gathered back at the main junction. They'd covered every accessible tunnel in the lower levels. Where else could they look? One of the Chun brothers, whose name was difficult for the other miners to pronounce and whom they simply called Chun, suggested searching the abandoned exploratory tunnels, dead-end passages that had been dug during initial surveys and then sealed off when they proved unproductive. Why would he go there? Thornton asked. Those passages are marked as closed. Didn't even have lighting. Chin shrugged. Maybe not go. Maybe taken. The broken English didn't diminish the chill those words sent through the assembled men. Taken. By what? By whom? Nevertheless, they agreed to check the sealed passages. Using crowbars, they pried away the boards that marked one of the closed tunnels as off-limits. The air that flowed out was stale and cold, carrying that same strange musky odor several men had noticed before. Thornton led the way, holding a powerful miner's lamp high. Behind him came 8 volunteers, all armed with picks and axes, though none could have explained exactly what they expected to fight with those tools. The abandoned tunnel descended sharply, angling deeper into the mountain. The walls showed signs of hasty excavation, rough unfinished, with support timbers placed irregularly. This passage had been abandoned quickly, perhaps when the coal seam ran out or became too difficult to work profitably. After roughly 100 yards, the tunnel opened into a natural cavern. The miners' lamps couldn't reach the ceiling, suggesting considerable height. The chamber was large, perhaps 60 feet across, and appeared to be natural rather than man-made. The miners had broken through into an existing geological formation, and there, in the center of the cavern floor, they found Thomas Fletcher. He was alive, barely. Fletcher sat with his back against a rock formation, his eyes wide and staring, his lips moving soundlessly. His clothes were torn, and fresh scratches covered his exposed skin. When Thornton approached and touched his shoulder, Fletcher recoiled violently, screaming, and scrambling backward until he collided with the rock wall. His screams echoed to the cavern, multiplying and distorting until it seemed like dozens of voices were crying out in terror. Fletcher? Thomas? It's me, it's Thornton. Big Jim grabbed the young man's shoulders, trying to break through his panic. Fletcher's eyes were unfocused, seeing something that wasn't there, or perhaps still seeing something that had been there moments ago. It took several minutes to calm him enough to move. Fletcher couldn't walk on his own. His legs seemed to have forgotten how. 2 miners supported him on either side as they made their way back to the tunnel, back toward the blessed familiarity of the active mining operation. They brought him to the surface. Daylight had never looked so precious. Several men later admitted they'd never been so grateful to feel the desert sun on their faces, even though it was barely past dawn and the air was still cold. Fletcher wouldn't speak. Not that day. Not for 2 days afterward. He sat in his bunkhouse bed, staring at the wall, flinching at every sound. The company doctor examined him and found no serious physical injuries beyond the scratches and some bruising. But something had broken inside the young man's mind. When he finally did speak, his words came in a torrent, fragmented, disjointed, but consistent in their terror. They came from the walls. Fletcher whispered to Big Jim Thornton on the 3rd day. His voice was hoarse, his hands trembling as they clutched the blanket. Hayes left to get the lamp. I kept working. I heard, I heard something move behind me, like scales on rock. You know that sound? Like when a snake moves across stone. Thornton nodded, saying nothing, letting Fletcher continue at his own pace. I turned around. My lamp was bright, should have shown everything, but I saw nothing, just empty tunnel. But I knew something was there. I could feel it watching me. I could hear it breathing. Fletcher's hands clenched tighter. Then my lamp went out, just died. Instant darkness. Complete. I've been in dark tunnels before, Mr. Thornton. I know what underground dark feels like. But this was different. This was... He struggled for words. This was a living darkness. Does that make sense? Go on, Thornton encouraged. Something grabbed me. Hands, but not hands. The fingers were too long, too strong. And they were cold, so cold, like grabbing onto ice. They pulled me. I tried to fight, tried to scream, but another hand, another not hand, covered my mouth. I could feel scales, dry scales against my face. Fletcher's breathing accelerated as he relived the memory. They dragged me, fast, faster than should be possible in those tunnels. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel the walls rushing past. We were going down, always down, into passages I didn't know existed. Then suddenly we stopped. They dropped me. I heard movement all around me, scratching, clicking sounds, like voices but not voices. Communication. They were talking to each other. About me? Thornton felt his skin prickle. What do you mean, talking about you? I don't know how I knew, Fletcher said, but I knew. They were deciding something, what to do with me. I couldn't understand the sound they made, but I understood the meaning. Some wanted one thing. Others wanted something different. They were debating. Then light. Faint, but after total darkness, it seemed bright. It came from them. Their eyes, glowing, yellow-green like fireflies, but steady, and there were so many of them. Dozens, maybe more, all around me in that cavern, watching me with those glowing eyes. Fletcher's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I saw them, Mr. Thornton. I saw what they were. They stood upright, like men, but they weren't men. They were taller than any man I've seen, 6.5, maybe 7 feet. Their bodies were covered in scales, not smooth like a fish, rough like a lizard's, dark-colored, brown and green and gray, all mixed together, perfect for hiding in rock and shadow. Fletcher's description became more detailed, as if speaking it aloud helped him process what he'd witnessed. Their heads were wrong, elongated. The skull came back in a crest. Their faces were flat, with wide mouths full of teeth, not fangs like a dog. Sharp teeth, lots of them, all the same length. Their eyes were large, too large for their faces, and they glowed. I told you that already. But it wasn't just light. It was intelligence. They were looking at me the way we look at animals, studying me, curious. Their hands had 4 fingers and a thumb. Each finger ended in a thick claw. Black claws, curved, maybe 2 inches long. The same claws that made those marks on the support beam. But the worst part, Fletcher paused, swallowing hard. The worst part was how they moved. They didn't walk like we do. They flowed, silent. One moment standing still, the next moment somewhere else, and you never heard them move. It was like they could teleport, or like they moved in the gaps when you blinked. How did you escape? Thornton asked. Fletcher shook his head. I didn't. They let me go. I don't know why. Maybe they decided I wasn't worth keeping. Or maybe, he looked directly at Thornton, maybe they wanted me to tell people, to warn us, to let us know they're down there and we should leave. Thornton reported Fletcher's account to the Humboldt Coal Company management. A telegram exchange followed with the main office in Carson City. The response was predictable. Fletcher had suffered a mental breakdown from the stress of being lost in the tunnels. His story was the product of panic and darkness. Mining operations would continue, but Thornton had seen Fletcher's eyes. He'd seen the scratches on a young man's body, scratches that matched the claw marks on the timber. He'd smelled that strange reptilian odor in the abandoned tunnel. and he'd felt something himself during the search. A presence, a sense of being watched by something intelligent and utterly alien. He couldn't force the company to shut down operations, but he could make sure his men were protected, as much as possible given the circumstances. Thornton implemented new safety protocols. No one would work in shaft C below the 500-foot level. All exploration of new passages would cease. Crews would focus on extracting coal from already proven seams in the upper levels. Most importantly, he instituted a buddy system that was non-negotiable. Every miner would be within sight or earshot of at least 2 others at all times. He also distributed whistles, loud, shrill devices that could be heard throughout the tunnel network. 3 short blasts meant danger and would bring every available man running. The miners appreciated these precautions, but morale was devastated. Thomas Fletcher's disappearance and his subsequent account had spread to the camp like wildfire. Every shadow in the tunnels seemed threatening. Every unexplained sound made men grip their tools tighter and glance nervously over their shoulders. Several miners quit outright, preferring unemployment to working in tunnels that might harbor intelligent reptilian creatures. Others stayed, but openly talked about leaving once they'd saved enough money for their families to survive the transition. For 10 days, an uneasy peace held. Work continued, though at a slower pace. The coal quota wasn't being met, but no one else disappeared. No new claw marks appeared. The strange sounds and sightings ceased. Perhaps, Thornton hoped, whatever had been down there had retreated deeper into the earth, satisfied that the miners had heeded the warning. Then came the night of March 31st, 1906. The night shift consisted of 12 men working in 3 groups across the upper levels. Big Jim Thornton was present himself, walking the tunnels, checking on crews, trying to maintain morale through his presence and confidence. At approximately 2:30 a.m., every lamp in Shaft C went out simultaneously. Not a flicker, not a gradual dimming. Instant darkness across several hundred yards of tunnel in a synchronized blackout that should have been impossible. Oil lamps didn't fail simultaneously unless deliberately extinguished. For perhaps 5 seconds, there was stunned silence. Then the whistles started. 3 sharp blasts, repeated over and over. The emergency signal from multiple locations. Multiple crews in distress at once. Thornton had been near the main shaft when the lights failed. He fumbled for matches, got his lamp relit, and ran toward the nearest whistle sounds. Behind him, he heard miners from the surface shift rushing down with spare lamps and lanterns. He found Miguel Cortez and his partner first. They'd backed against the wall, their picks held defensively. Cortez's hand shook so badly he could barely hold the whistle to his lips for another blast. "What happened?" Thornton demanded. "They're here," Cortez gasped. "All around us. We heard them moving. In the walls. Above us. They put out the lights, and they came." "Did you see them?" Cortez shook his head violently. "Didn't need to see them. We heard them. They were talking. Those clicking sounds. Those voices that aren't voices. Right next to us in the dark. Close enough to touch." Before Thornton could respond, a scream echoed to the tunnel network. A human scream, raw with terror, suddenly cut short. The direction was unclear. The acoustics of the mine made pinpointing sounds nearly impossible. "Everyone to the main junction," Thornton bellowed. "Abandon your positions. Move to the junction now." He ran to the tunnels, repeating the order, gathering men as he went. The miners needed no encouragement. They fled their workstations, some still clutching their tools, others dropping everything in their panic to reach safety. The main junction was a wider chamber, where 3 primary tunnels converged. It was well lit under normal circumstances, and now miners on the surface were arriving with additional lanterns, pushing back the darkness. Thornton did a quick head count as men continued to stream in from various passages. 9, 10, 11, 12 minus. He counted again. Only 11 men. 1 missing. "Who's not here?" he shouted. "Sound off by crews." The roll call revealed that Robert Hayes, the same man who'd been partnered with Fletcher, was unaccounted for. He'd been working with William McKay in the northern extension of Shaft C. "Where's McKay?" Thornton demanded. "Here." The Scotsman pushed through the crowd, his face pale and streaked with cold dust. Hayes was right behind me. Right behind me. We were moving to the junction together. Then I turned, and he was gone. Just gone. Vanished between one step and the next. Did you hear anything? See anything? McKay's expression was haunted. I saw eyes. Just for a second. Yellow-green eyes in the darkness. Multiple sets. Watching us. Then Hayes made a sound, not a scream, more like all his breath went out at once. And when I turned back, he wasn't there anymore. Thornton made the hardest decision of his career. We're evacuating. Everyone out. Now, grab what tools you can carry, but don't stop moving. We're sealing the shaft. What about Hayes? One of the younger miners asked. Thornton wanted to mount a rescue. Every instinct screamed at him to search for his missing man. But he thought of Fletcher's story. He remembered the claw marks, the strange tracks, the oppressive sense of being watched by something intelligent and hostile. He looked at the faces of his men. Experienced miners reduced to terror by whatever lurked in these depths. We can't help him in the dark, Thornton said, his voice heavy. We're outnumbered by something we don't understand. We get to the surface, we get more men, more light, and we come back prepared. The evacuation proceeded in organized chaos. Men practically ran up the long slope to the surface, their relief at seeing stars overhead almost palpable. The cool night air of the Nevada desert had never tasted sweeter. When the last miner cleared the shaft entrance, Thornton ordered the gates sealed and posted guards. No one would enter until sunrise brought full daylight, and they could organize a proper rescue mission with adequate lighting and weapons. But dawn would bring something unexpected that would change everything. As the first rays of sunlight touched the mine entrance, Big Jim Thornton assembled a rescue team. He selected only volunteers, 15 men who were willing to descend back into the depths to search for Robert Hayes. They armed themselves with every lamp available, plus rifles borrowed from the company guards. Whatever was down there, they would be ready. Before they could enter, one of the guards posted at the entrance shouted, "Movement! I see movement in the shaft." Every man tensed, weapons raised. Thornton stepped forward, positioning himself between his men and whatever might emerge from the darkness below. A figure stumbled into the dawnlight. Human, male, covered in dirt and blood. Robert Hayes. 2 miners rushed forward, catching him before he collapsed. His clothes were shredded, his face scratched and bruised, but he was alive. Miraculously, impossibly alive. They carried him to the medical tent. The company doctor worked quickly, cleaning wounds and checking for serious injuries. Hayes drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling incoherently. When he finally came fully awake an hour later, his first words were, "Did I get out? Tell me I got out." "You're safe," Thornton assured him. "You're on the surface. What happened down there?" Hayes' story matched Fletcher's in disturbing ways. "I was following McKay toward the junction," Hayes began, his voice rasping. "Then something grabbed me from behind, pulled me backward so fast I didn't have time to shout. I was in McKay's lamplight 1 second, in total darkness the next. They took me deeper, different tunnels than before, not the ones we dug, natural passages. Old, very old. The walls were smooth, like they'd been worn down by water or something moving through them for centuries." Hayes described being dragged through a maze of interconnected caverns, each one larger than the last. His captors moved in complete silence, their clawed hands gripping his arms with strength that made resistance pointless. Finally, we stopped in a huge chamber. I mean huge, like a cathedral. And it wasn't empty. There were dozens of them, maybe 100, all sizes, some as tall as 7 feet, others smaller. Juveniles, maybe, or females, I don't know. And they were organized, Hayes emphasized. This wasn't just a nest or a lair. It was a settlement. They had areas for different purposes. I could see tunnels leading off in multiple directions. This was their home. They built something down there. The most chilling part of Hayes' account was what happened next. The creatures formed a circle around him, their glowing eyes providing the only light. They made their clicking, hissing sounds, their language, and Hayes had the distinct impression they were discussing him. arguing about him. "I think someone wanted to kill me," Hayes said bluntly. I could tell from their posture, their movements. They were aggressive, moving closer. Others seemed to be arguing against it. There was definitely a hierarchy. Some were clearly in charge. Others deferred to them. The largest one, must have been 8 feet tall, moved toward me. It got close enough that I could smell its breath. Like copper and earth and something else I can't describe. It looked at me for a long time. Really looked at me. Into my eyes. And I swear, Mr. Thornton, it was thinking. It was intelligent. More than an animal. It was a person. Just not a human person. Then it made a decision. It reached toward me, and I thought I was dead. But instead of killing me, it grabbed my shoulder and pushed me toward one of the tunnels. It was showing me the way out. Hayes described being escorted to the passages by 2 of the creatures. They moved quickly, clearly knowing the route, and he struggled to keep pace. They brought him to a tunnel he recognized, one of the abandoned exploratory passages near where Fletcher had been found. They stopped at the edge of our territory. Hayes said, "The place where our tunnels meet the natural ones." And they just stood there, waiting for me to go. One of them made a sound. I think it was communicating. Then it pointed up, toward the surface. The meaning was clear. Go, leave, and don't come back. So I ran. I didn't stop running until I saw daylight. Thornton sent a detailed telegram to the Humboldt Coal Company headquarters in Carson City. He outlined everything. Fletcher's disappearance and rescue, the mass incident, Hayes' abduction and release, the consistent descriptions of intelligent reptilian creatures living in the deeper passages. The response came within hours. Company officials would arrive the next day to assess the situation personally. Until then, all mining operations were suspended. That night, Thornton couldn't sleep. He sat outside his tent, staring at the dark mouth of Shaft C. What exactly were they dealing with? His practical miner's mind wanted to dismiss the stories as mass hysteria, group delusion, anything rational. But he'd seen the fear in his men's eyes. He'd felt that presence in the tunnels himself. He'd examined the physical evidence, the claw marks, the scratches on his men, the impossible ways experienced miners had vanished and reappeared. And he kept returning to one disturbing question. If these creatures wanted to kill the miners, why hadn't they? Hayes had been at their mercy. So had Fletcher. Both men had been taken deep into creature territory, surrounded by dozens of these beings, and both had been released unharmed beyond some scratches. Why? Were they showing mercy? Sending a message? Or was this some kind of territorial display, a warning to leave before the real violence began? The company officials arrived on April 2nd. 3 men in suits who looked entirely out of place in the mining camp. They interviewed Fletcher and Hayes extensively, their expressions growing increasingly skeptical. They examined the claw marks, measured the strange tracks, and descended into Shaft C with a heavily armed escort. They found nothing. No creatures. No glowing eyes. No strange sounds or disturbed areas. The tunnels were empty except for abandoned equipment and coal dust. After 3 days of investigation, the officials reached their conclusion, and it was exactly what Thornton had feared they would conclude: mass hysteria brought on by isolation, darkness, and the natural stresses of underground work. The claw marks were attributed to equipment. The strange tracks were dismissed as unusual rock formations misinterpreted by frightened men. Fletcher and Hayes had simply gotten lost and panicked, their minds creating elaborate fantasies to cope with the trauma. The Humboldt Coal Company would reopen operations. Any miner unwilling to return to work would be released from his contract without penalty, but also without any additional compensation. The investigation was closed. Big Jim Thornton stood in the company office tent, listening to this assessment with mounting anger. So you're saying 23 men, experienced miners, men who worked underground for decades, all imagine the same thing? The same creatures? The same details? The lead official, a thin man named Harrison, adjusted his spectacles. I'm saying fear is contagious, Mr. Thornton. One man has an experience, tells others, and soon everyone is seeing the same things. It's well documented in isolated work environments. And the physical evidence can be explained conventionally, Harrison replied. Look, I understand your men believe what they've reported. I'm not calling them liars. But belief and objective reality aren't always the same thing. We cannot shut down a profitable operation based on unverifiable claims, regardless of how sincerely they're made. Thornton's jaw clenched. And if you're wrong, if something happens when operations resume, then we'll address it at that time, Harrison said. But I suspect once work resumes and men fall back into routine, these incidents will cease. Normal operations will restore normal perspectives. The meeting ended. Thornton walked back to the miners' quarters, dreading the conversation he would need to have with his men. He assembled everyone in the mess hall that evening and laid out the situation plainly. The company considered the matter closed. Work would resume in 2 days. Any man who wished to leave could do so without penalty, but those who stayed would be expected to work their full shifts without special provisions. What I'm about to say is not company policy, Thornton continued, his voice low. This is Jim Thornton talking to you as a fellow miner. I believe you. I believe Fletcher. I believe Hayes. I believe something is down there in those deep tunnels, and I don't think we understand what it is or what it's capable of. He looked around the room, meeting each man's eyes. If you have families, if you have other prospects, I'd suggest you leave. If you need references for other work, I'll write them. If you need travel money, I'll advance it from my own pocket. No shame in walking away from this. But I'm staying, he added. This is my mind, my responsibility. And if we do continue working here, I want it to be with men who will watch each other's backs and take this threat seriously, whatever it is. The room fell silent as men considered their options. Finally, William McKay stood. I'm staying. I've got nowhere else to go and nothing else I know how to do. But I won't work the deep sections. Upper levels only. Miguel Cortez rose next. I stay too. But McKay is right, only upper levels. We stay away from their territory. Maybe they stay away from ours. One by one, men declared their intentions. In the end, 15 of the original 23 agreed to stay. 8 would leave, including young Thomas Fletcher, who had already purchased a train ticket to San Francisco and would never work in a mine again. The exodus happened over the following day. Thornton shook hands with each departing miner, thanking them for their service. He watched them load onto wagons headed for the nearest town, and he envied their escape. When work resumed on April 5th, Thornton implemented strict new protocols regardless of company approval. Shaft C would be restricted to depths no greater than 400 feet. All deeper sections were permanently sealed with heavy timber and metal grating. Posted signs read, "Abandoned section, unstable, no entry." He also mandated that all work cease 1 hour before sunset and resume no earlier than 1 hour after sunrise. Daylight shifts only. Whatever was down there seemed most active at night, and Thornton wanted his men working during hours when the creatures, if they existed, appeared less likely to emerge. Additional lighting was installed throughout the active tunnels, far more than necessary for work, but Thornton wanted every shadow eliminated. He also positioned supply stations every 100 feet, each stocked with fresh lamps, extra oil whistles, and now something new, rifles and shotguns. I don't know if bullets will stop them, he told his crew chiefs. But if someone is grabbed, if someone is in danger, I want the option to fight back. The men appreciated these precautions. It gave them a sense of control, however illusory. They could face known dangers, cave-ins, gas pockets, equipment failures. They'd learn to face this unknown danger too, even if they didn't understand it. For 2 weeks, the new system worked. Coal production resumed at a reduced but acceptable rate. No incidents occurred. No disappearances, no sightings, no strange sounds. The creatures, or whatever they were, seemed to accept the new boundary. Thornton allowed himself to hope that an unspoken truce had been reached. The humans would take coal from the upper levels, and the creatures would remain in their deeper territory. A territorial agreement worked out through action rather than words. He should have known it wouldn't last. April 19, 1906, started as a routine work day. 3 crews working the upper levels of Shaft C, extracting coal from proven seams. Good production, high morale. The men were starting to relax, starting to believe the crisis had passed. Then, at approximately 2 p.m., A section of tunnel collapsed. Not a catastrophic cave-in. The kind that killed everyone instantly. This was a partial collapse. A section of ceiling gave way, blocking one of the main passages and trapping Miguel Cortez and one of the Chin brothers in a side tunnel beyond the blockage. Thornton responded immediately with emergency protocol, gathering every available man for the rescue effort. Cave-ins were a known risk, something miners trained for and dealt with regularly. They had procedures, equipment, experience. The rescue team began clearing rubble from the collapse site, working carefully to avoid triggering a larger fall. They could hear Cortez and Chun on the other side, confirming both men were alive and uninjured. The blockage wasn't severe, maybe 3 feet of broken rock and timber. They'd have it cleared within an hour. But the collapse had broken through into something. As they removed rocks from the pile, they discovered the collapse hadn't been caused by structural failure. Something had undermined the support beams from below. The floor of the tunnel had given way, revealing a hollow space beneath, a natural cavity that shouldn't have been there. And from that cavity, air flowed upward. Cool air, carrying that distinctive musky, reptilian odor they'd all learned to recognize. "Stop," Thornton ordered. The men paused, looking at him. "Everyone get back. Back to the main junction. Now." "But Cortez and Chun," one miner began, "can wait on the other side for a few minutes," Thornton interrupted. Something's not right about this collapse. He was moving the men back when they heard it. A sound from the hollow space beneath the collapsed floor. Scratching, then more scratching. Multiple sources. Things moving through the cavity. "Coming up. Run," Thornton shouted. The men didn't need to be told twice. They fled toward the main junction, their lamps swinging wildly, casting chaotic shadows. Behind them, the sound grew louder. Not just scratching now, clicking, hissing, the sounds of the creature's communication. They were coming up, into the active mining areas, breaking the unspoken truce. Thornton was the last to reach the junction. He grabbed one of the rifles from the supply station and turned to face the tunnel they'd just evacuated. Other miners did the same, forming a defensive line across the junction entrance. For a long moment, nothing happened, just darkness and distant sounds of movement. Then eyes appeared in the tunnel. Multiple sets, yellow, green, and glowing, advancing slowly. "Hold your fire," Thornton commanded, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Wait until we see them clearly. Aim for center mass." The creatures emerged into the lamplight. Thornton got his first clear look at what his men had been describing for weeks. They were exactly as Fletcher and Hayes had reported. 7 feet tall, scales covering their bodies in complex patterns of brown and gray. Their heads were elongated, crested, with large eyes that reflected the lamplight with an eerie intelligence. Their hands ended in curved black claws, and they moved with a fluid grace that was both beautiful and terrifying. 5 of them advanced into the junction. They stopped about 30 feet from the defensive line of miners, studying the humans with what appeared to be curiosity. One, the largest, clearly the leader, stepped forward. It looked directly at Thornton. For several seconds, neither side moved. A standoff, a moment of decision that could go either direction. Then the creature raised one clawed hand, not in a threatening gesture, almost exploratory. It pointed at Thornton, then pointed down, toward the collapsed tunnel. Then it made a series of clicks and hisses. "What's it doing?" William McKay whispered. "I think," Thornton said slowly, "I think it's trying to communicate. It's pointing to the collapse, to the damage." The creature repeated the gesture. "Point at the miners. Point at the collapsed tunnel." More vocalizations, more emphatic this time. "I think it's saying we caused the problem," Thornton realized. "We broke into their territory. The collapse went down into their tunnels. We didn't mean to," McKay began. "It doesn't care about intent," Thornton interrupted. "We violated the boundary. Accidentally, yes, but from their perspective, we're invading." The lead creature made another gesture. It swept its arm toward the tunnel leading to the surface, then pointed at the miners again. The meaning was unmistakable. "Leave." "What do we do?" one of the younger miners asked, his rifle shaking in his hands. Thornton made his decision. He slowly lowered his rifle, making his movements deliberate and non-threatening. Everyone lower your weapons. Slowly. Don't make any sudden moves. Jim, they could rush us. They could have rushed us already, Thornton said. They outnumber us. They know these tunnels better than we do. If they wanted us dead, we'd be dead. They're giving us a chance to leave peacefully. We're going to take it. One by one, the miners lowered their weapons. The creatures watched, their glowing eyes tracking every movement. Now, Thornton said, we're going to back away. Keep your eyes on them, but move toward the main shaft. Don't run. Don't make threatening gestures. Just retreat. They began moving backward, maintaining a defensive line. The creatures didn't follow. They simply watched as the humans withdrew, their expressions, if they could be called expressions, unreadable. When the miners reached the main shaft, Thornton turned to his crew, everyone to the surface. Grab Cortez and Chin on the way. They should be able to come around through the northern passage. We're evacuating. For how long? McKay asked. Thornton looked back at the junction, where the creature's eyes still glowed in the darkness. Permanently, he said. This mine is done. The final evacuation. The extraction took 3 hours. They had to carefully retrieve Cortez and Chun from their trap position, which required clearing a partial blockage from an alternate route. Both men were shaken but unharmed, though they reported hearing sounds all around in the darkness while they waited. Clicking, hissing sounds from the walls, the floor, everywhere. They were all around us, Cortez said as they emerged into daylight. In passages we didn't know existed. This whole mountain must be hollow with their tunnels. We were never alone down there. Not from the first day we started digging. Thornton organized the evacuation of all equipment and personal belongings. From the mining camp, he telegraphed Carson City with a simple message. Shaft C permanently closed due to structural instability. Operation relocating to alternative site. He didn't mention the creatures. There was no point. Company officials had already dismissed such claims, and Thornton had no intention of fighting that battle again. By sunset on April 19th, the Humboldt Coal Company mining operation at Golconda was abandoned. The shaft entrances were sealed with heavy timbers, and signs were posted warning of unstable conditions. The camp structures were left standing. Perhaps someone would return to salvage them later, though Thornton doubted it. The place had a taint now, a reputation. No one would want to work there. As the last wagon pulled away, carrying the remaining miners and their possessions toward the nearest town, Thornton took one final look at the mine he'd supervised for just 4 months. It seemed longer. It felt like years had passed since that optimistic day in January when they'd first broken ground. William McKay sat beside him in the wagon. "Do you think they'll stay down there?" the Scotsman asked quietly. "Or will they come up, spread to other mines?" "I don't know," Thornton admitted. "But I think they've been down there for a very long time. Longer than we've been mining in Nevada. Maybe longer than we've been in North America at all. And they've stayed hidden because they want to stay hidden. We force them to reveal themselves by digging too deep, breaking into their territory." "What do we tell people?" McKay asked. "About what we saw?" Thornton considered this. "We tell them the truth. Let them decide whether to believe it or not. But I'll tell you this. I'll never work a mine that goes deeper than 500 feet again. And I'll never dismiss another miner's story about strange things in the deep tunnels." The story of the Golconda mine spread quickly through Nevada's mining communities. Thornton and his men told their stories in saloons and boarding houses, around campfires and in mining offices. Some listeners believed. Most didn't. But the story persisted, growing and changing as stories do. Other miners began reporting similar experiences. A silver mine near Virginia City closed suddenly in 1907 after workers claimed to see devil creatures in the deepest shafts. A copper mine in Eerie had repeated unexplained disappearances in its lower levels throughout 1908. A mine near Tonopah reported strange claw marks and reptilian tracks identical to those found at Golconda. Were these copycat stories inspired by the Golconda account? Or were they independent confirmations that something truly lived in Nevada's deep places? Thomas Fletcher, the young miner who'd been the first to encounter the creatures, never fully recovered. He moved to San Francisco, found work as a dock worker, anything that kept him above ground, and rarely spoke of his experience. When the great earthquake and fire struck San Francisco in 1906, just weeks after he'd left the mine, Fletcher helped rescue people from collapsed buildings. Friends noted he was fearless during the disaster, walking into unstable structures without hesitation. "After what I've seen in the dark underground," he told one friend, "burning buildings don't frighten me much." Robert Hayes returned to mining after several months, but only in surface operations. Quarries and open-pit mines where the sun always shone. He never descended into a tunnel again. He lived to be 73 and told the story of his encounter to his grandchildren, who thought it was just an exciting tale he'd invented to entertain them. William McKay continued mining, but shared Thornton's newfound caution about depth. He worked exclusively in shallow shaft operations and became something of an advocate for safety regulations. He campaigned for better lighting in mines, mandatory buddy systems, and strict depth limitations. When asked why, he would say only, "There are things in the deep earth that we're better off not disturbing." The Chun brothers vanished from public record. Some reports suggest they returned to China, though this can't be confirmed. Their contributions to the story exist only in Thornton's written account and references from other miners. Miguel Cortez worked various mining jobs throughout Nevada for another decade before retiring to a small ranch. He kept a loaded shotgun by his bed for the rest of his life and never gave a clear answer when his wife asked why. Big Jim Thornton kept his promise. He never worked a mine deeper than 500 feet again. He also began collecting stories from other miners about unexplained encounters in deep shafts. He filled 3 notebooks with accounts from across the western United States. Stories of strange creatures, impossible sounds, unexplained disappearances. He believed he was documenting a hidden truth that science and industry refused to acknowledge. His notebooks were never published. They disappeared after his death in 1924, possibly destroyed by family members who considered them embarrassing evidence of mental decline. Only fragments survive in letters he sent to fellow miners, and in a single interview he gave to a Nevada newspaper in 1912. When anthropologists and geologists heard the Golconda story, most dismissed it immediately. The idea of an unknown species of intelligent reptilian humanoids living in Nevada mountains contradicted everything known about evolutionary biology and paleontology. However, a few researchers were intrigued. Dr. Samuel Winters, a paleontologist from the University of California, visited the sealed Golconda mine site in 1908. He interviewed several of the miners who'd worked there and examined plaster casts that Thornton had made of the unusual footprints before leaving. In his private journal, not published until after his death, Winters wrote, "I cannot explain the tracks. They resemble no known species. The miners' accounts are remarkably consistent, showing none of the variation typically seen in fabricated stories. Either this is the most elaborate hoax in mining history, involving dozens of conspirators with nothing to gain, or these men witnessed something that challenges our understanding of what inhabits the deep places of the earth." Winters attempted to organize an expedition to reopen one of the Golconda shafts and conduct a proper scientific investigation. He secured funding and assembled a team. But before the expedition could launch, a mysterious fire destroyed the university's research facility, consuming all of Winters' notes, photographs, and the plaster casts. The expedition was canceled and never rescheduled. Some suspected arson, though no one was ever charged. Winters himself became increasingly paranoid in his final years, claiming he was being watched and that powerful interests wanted to keep the truth about the Golconda creatures hidden. He died in 1915 under circumstances his family considered suspicious, though the official cause was listed as heart failure. The Golconda mine story faded into obscurity for decades. It became a footnote in Nevada mining history, usually mentioned only as an example of frontier superstition or mass hysteria, if mentioned at all. Then, in the 1970s, cryptozoologists rediscovered the account. They found references in old mining journals and newspapers, tracked down descendants of the original miners, and pieced together the full story. The case of the Golconda, lizard people became a staple of paranormal and cryptozoological literature. Several attempts have been made to locate and explore the seal mine shafts. Most have been unsuccessful. The desert had reclaimed the sites, and century-old landmarks had disappeared. One expedition in 1998 claimed to have found one of the original shaft entrances, but they reported it had completely collapsed and was inaccessible. In 2003, a team of cave explorers did discover a series of natural caverns in the Humboldt Range, roughly in the area where the Golconda mine had operated. The passages were extensive, connecting to form an underground network that extended for miles. In one deep chamber, the explorers found unusual carvings on the walls, geometric patterns and symbols that appeared deliberately created rather than natural. They also found scratches, deep gouges in the rock face that could have been made by large claws. And in the dust on the floor of one cavern, they photographed what appeared to be tracks, elongated, five-toed prints with distinctive claw marks. The photographs were analyzed by experts who couldn't identify the species that might have made them. The explorers returned for a second expedition 6 months later. They planned to map the entire tunnel system and document everything they found. But when they returned to the site, they discovered the entrance had collapsed recently, judging by the fresh earth and broken rock. Despite extensive searching, they couldn't find another way into the system. It felt deliberate. One explorer later said in an interview, like someone didn't want us coming back. Like the entrance had been sealed from the inside. Over the years, numerous theories have been proposed to explain the Golconda encounters. The official explanation, a group of isolated men, working in dangerous conditions, created a shared delusion. But this theory struggles to explain the physical evidence. The claw marks, the tracks, the multiple independent sightings with consistent details. Some cryptozoologists suggest an undiscovered species of large reptile, possibly related to ancient lineages thought to be extinct. But no reptile, living or extinct, matches the descriptions of bipedal, intelligent, tool-using beings. The most controversial theories suggest the creatures are survivors of an ancient civilization that existed before human recorded history. They retreated underground when the surface climate changed or when humans began to dominate. This would explain the apparent intelligence, organization, and even the possible structures found in deep caverns. But the lack of any other physical evidence makes this theory difficult to support. Some paranormal researchers propose the creatures exist partially in another dimension and can move between spaces in ways that seem impossible to human observers. This would explain how they appeared and disappeared so suddenly. However, this explanation raises more questions than it answers. Perhaps the entire story was fabricated for reasons unknown, though what those reasons might be remains unclear. The miners gained nothing from their accounts. If anything, they suffered professionally, being labeled as unreliable or mentally unstable. The truth remains elusive. What actually happened in those Nevada tunnels in 1906? Were the miners truly confronted by intelligent reptilian beings? Or was it a perfect storm of fear, isolation, and suggestion that created a shared delusion complete with physical manifestations? Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Golconda story isn't what the miners claim to see, but the implications if they were telling the truth. If intelligent non-human beings exist in the deep places of the earth, how many are there? How widespread are their settlements? Have they been there for centuries, millennia, watching as human civilization expanded across the surface, digging ever deeper into their territory? And most critically, what happens when we inevitably dig too deep again? Modern mining operations go far deeper than the 19th century shafts. We extract resources from miles below the surface. We drill for oil and gas in previously inaccessible depths. We create enormous caverns for storage and disposal. Every year, we push further into the earth. Are we heading toward another encounter? Or have we already had them, with reports dismissed or suppressed? Consider how many mines worldwide have closed suddenly for structural or economic reasons. How many miners have disappeared in deep shafts, their bodies never recovered? How many workers in underground facilities report strange encounters that are officially explained away? The Golconda story suggests we share this planet with something else, something intelligent, something that has chosen to remain hidden, but is capable of defending its territory when necessary. If that's true, then every deep mine, every tunnel, every cave system might be a doorway to discovery or disaster. The original Golconda mine site is now on private land. The owner doesn't allow visitors and has posted signs warning of dangerous abandoned mining structures. Whether they're trying to protect people from physical hazards or from something else remains unclear. The Humboldt Range still stands against the Nevada sky, keeping its secrets. Somewhere beneath those mountains, perhaps in natural caverns that humans never built and rarely discover, something might still dwell, something that predates our civilization, something that has learned to avoid us, that has adapted to our presence by retreating deeper, always deeper. And sometimes, when modern miners work the deep shafts of Nevada, they report strange things, sound that shouldn't exist, tracks that don't match any known animal, the sensation of being watched from the darkness beyond their lights. Most dismiss these reports. But if you remember the story of the Golconda mine and the Nevada coal miners of 1906, and they wonder, what if it wasn't just a story? What if they were telling the truth? What if right now, something is watching us from beneath the earth, waiting patiently in the dark? The mountain keeps its secrets. But the question remains, echoing through the years, what else is down there, in the places we haven't yet explored? And what will happen when we inevitably disturb it again?